Store number 1.DENALI National Park is a wild and unforgiving place, especially in winter. Nearly 6 million acres of rugged, isolated terrain sprawl beneath the icy Alaskan sky. It's home to grizzlies, wolves, and sub-zero temperatures that can steal warmth from your bones faster than you realize. It's a place I've learned to respect deeply, knowing how swiftly its beauty can turn lethal. My name is Ellie Warren, and this was my first real winter assignment as a ranger cadet. I had always dreamed of working in wilderness parks, but even after months of training, nothing quite prepares you for Denali in February. 3 weeks earlier, reports began trickling into headquarters. Hikers along the Stampede Trail had stumbled across something strange: unusual bone piles and eerie markings carved into the trees. There were whispers of animal mutilations, but no one could explain what predator might arrange bones so deliberately. Rangers Stan Keller and Julia Maddox were assigned to investigate. I was given permission to tag along for hands-on field experience. On a frozen Wednesday morning, we loaded up the snowmobiles at the park's northern outpost near Healy. Julia drove, with me tucked behind her, gripping tightly to the seat handles. Stan rode alone, leading the way deeper into the park's dense spruce forest. At first, the ride was exhilarating, a rush of crisp air and endless, pristine white stretching out ahead of us. But the farther we traveled along the Stampede Trail, the more uneasy I began to feel. The towering black spruce pressed in closer, casting shadows so deep they seemed untouched by sunlight. I adjusted my GoPro, strapped to my chest. It was standard practice to document our surveys during training missions, but something was off. The battery indicator was flickering, dipping lower than it should have this early in the trip. Stan raised his hand, signaling for us to slow down. He pointed toward a clearing to the left. My breath caught sharply when I saw it. A neat spiral of animal bones lay on the untouched snow. At the top sat a skull, white, clean, and gleaming in the pale winter sunlight. Julia parked our snowmobile beside Stan's, and we stepped off cautiously. The snow was deep, crunching softly beneath our boots. No tracks, Stan muttered, crouching near the pile. Nothing at all, not even scavenger prints. Julia circled the spiral slowly, her breath hanging in the frozen air. Julia studied the perimeter, her brow furrowed. "That's impossible," she murmured. "Something arranged these bones." I felt my pulse quicken. The bones were completely stripped of flesh, smooth and clean, like polished stone. They had been placed carefully, almost reverently. Stan straightened suddenly, nodding toward a tall spruce nearby. "Look." Julia and I moved toward the tree. Long, vertical gouges had been carved deeply into the bark, rising at least 12 feet off the ground. Too deliberate to be accidental, too high to be from a bear or a wolf. Julia glanced at Stan. Unease flickered in her eyes. She reached for her radio and clicked the transmission button. Static crackled loudly in response. No voice came through. She shook her head, frustration tightening her jaw. "Radio signals are spotty," she said. Stan glanced back at the bone spiral. "We should keep going, at least to the old cabin site. Something might be sheltering nearby." Julia nodded slowly, hesitantly. We climbed back onto our snowmobiles. I tightened my gloves, trying to suppress a chill that wasn't entirely from the cold. My fingers trembled slightly as I restarted the GoPro, hoping it would keep recording. By dusk, the sky had bruised with twilight. Julia guided us to a small clearing beside a frozen stream. We set camp quickly. There were no sounds, not a single bird, not even the faint rustle of hidden wildlife. Only silence. Heavy, unnatural silence. Stan built a small fire. The flames flickered weakly against the growing dark, casting long shadows that seemed to press in from all sides. I kept glancing toward the trees, feeling watched. Eyes in the dark, eyes that weren't there. Julia caught my stare and gave a reassuring nod, but her shoulders were tight with tension. Sleep didn't come easily. Wrapped tightly in my sleeping bag, every rustle of nylon sounded deafening. I lay awake, heart pounding, staring at the faint orange glow through the tent fabric. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard it. A strange, rhythmic noise echoed faintly outside. It wasn't footsteps. It was lighter, sharper, a gentle, deliberate tapping, like snow being shaken from branches above. It drifted closer, hovered outside, then faded into silence. By morning, tension and exhaustion had carved dark circles beneath our eyes. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the icy light of dawn, only to feel dread sink like stone in my chest. One of the snowmobiles was gone. Stan moved quickly, scanning the ground. He knelt beside faint tracks in the snow. His eyes widened as he followed them uphill. They head toward that ridge, he said, but then paused, scanning the tree line. Confusion clouded his expression. They just stop. I approached slowly, following his gaze. Sure enough, the snowmobile tracks ended halfway up the incline as if it had vanished mid-ride. Julia checked her radio again. Still nothing but static. Her voice was calm, steady, but beneath it, I could hear the strain. We need to go up, she said. We strapped on our snowshoes in silence. My eyes stayed locked on the darkening ridgeline ahead, a jagged silhouette against the fading sky. Something inside me stirred uneasily. For the first time since we had stepped foot in Denali, I questioned whether we were truly alone. Leaving our camp behind, we began the slow climb uphill, deeper into the shadowed embrace of the trees. None of us knew then that this moment would be the last normal one of our expedition. As we ventured farther into the wilderness, I felt my grip on calm start to slip. With only one snowmobile remaining, we were forced to continue on foot. Our snowshoes crunched through thick drifts, slowing our progress to a crawl. The sky turned a dull gray. Daylight faded faster than expected. Each step echoed too loudly in the dense silence of the forest. Julia kept glancing back at me. Her eyes were cautious, protective, even. Stan led the way, occasionally pausing to scan the trees with narrowed eyes. Something had shifted in him. There was a nervous edge now, a hesitation I had never seen in the usually confident ranger. In our past. Then Stan abruptly raised a hand. Hold up. I followed his gaze and a chill ran down my spine. Just beyond a thicket of alder branches lay another bone pile. It was larger than the last, its dark shape stark against the snow. Julia approached slowly, her boots sinking deep. Her flashlight flicked across the scene, the beam quivering in her grip. This pile was different. The bones were larger, thicker ribs, long, curved vertebrae. They had been carefully arranged and lashed together with what looked like sinew. My mouth went dry as I recognized the shapes. The size was unmistakable. Human. Stan knelt beside it, face grim. Whoever did this took their time, he muttered. Julia said nothing. She seemed transfixed, staring at the bones as though they might reveal their message if she just looked hard enough. Finally, she shook her head, visibly disturbed. Let's document quickly. We need to get out of here. I nodded, adjusting my GoPro with trembling fingers. The battery indicator flickered again, dangerously low. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure shadowed, distant just beyond the trees. My heart leapt. I grabbed Stan's sleeve urgently. There, I whispered hoarsely, pointing toward the tree line. Stan raised his binoculars without hesitation. Julia stood beside him, tense and silent. I could hear the faint rasp of their breathing visible in soft puffs of fogged air. Stan lowered the binoculars. He shook his head. Nothing. I saw something, I insisted, my voice barely audible. Tall, watching us. Julia squeezed my shoulder gently. It's getting dark, Ellie. Shadows play tricks. Stan shook his head slowly, unconvinced. No, she's right. Something's been following us since we found the first pile. A sudden gust of icy wind rattled the branches around us. We exchanged uneasy glances. Julia clicked her radio, desperation tightening her face. The only static replied, "Compass is off," Stan said quietly. He shook his head at the small instrument in his gloved hand. The needle spun lazily, without purpose. We've lost direction completely. Panic surged in my chest. Julia clenched her jaw, forcing calm into her voice. We'll navigate by landmarks. There's an old hunting cabin nearby. If we can find it, we'll shelter there for the night. Darkness fell rapidly. We pushed forward, stumbling through the thickening snow, chasing the hope of safety. My legs ached, my heart pounded, and behind us always was the sense that we were being watched. The shadows felt alive, charged with a hidden threat that pressed in from all sides. The trees grew denser, their gnarled forms leaning close, narrowing the path, testing our will with every labored step. Then, finally, Julia pointed ahead. A clearing, barely visible in the dim twilight, stood a small, half-collapsed structure. Weathered logs slumped against one another in silent decay. Relief flickered in my chest, but it vanished the moment Stan raised his hand again, motioning for silence. Something moved nearby. It wasn't the wind, a sound subtle, deliberate, a scraping noise, like a branch dragged slowly across bark with intent. I froze, breath trapped tight in my chest. Julia raised her flashlight. The beam swept upward, illuminating fresh gouges in the bark of a tree towering over us. They were deep, violent, far higher than any human could reach. Stan's voice was low and shaken. Those weren't there before, and now Julia's Voice cracked, urgency overriding composure. We rushed inside the shelter, dragging a broken beam across the entrance asterisk. Chunks of frozen debris sealed us in. The air inside was thick with cold and rot. We sat huddled in silence, every sense straining. Then, from outside it started again. A soft tapping, deliberate, rhythmic, slow. It circled the cabin. I could barely breathe. The sound moved patiently, encircling us like a predator stalking its prey. Suddenly, something pressed against the outer wall, massive, silent. It blotted out the slivers of moonlight seeping through the cracks in the boards. For a long second, we sat frozen in absolute stillness. Julia touched my hand, barely a whisper of contact, urging me not to move, not to breathe. Then just as silently it was gone. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. It hung in the darkness like a weight on our chests. Eventually, exhaustion won. One by one, we drifted into shallow, uneasy sleep. Hours later, I jolted awake. Something was wrong, very wrong. Stan's sleeping bag lay beside me, ripped open along its length. Tufts of insulation floated gently in the frigid breeze seeping through a fresh gap in our barricade. His boots were still beside his pack. Stan was gone. Julia sat upright, eyes wide with horror. Wordless, we stumbled out of the shelter, flashlights slicing through the dark. Drag marks. They led away from the cabin, into the deeper woods toward a ravine. We ran, desperation in our veins, chasing the last traces of our friend. Then Julia stopped, her being locked onto something swinging from a low branch. Stan's ranger jacket. Empty. It swayed gently in the cold air. No blood, no footprints, no trail. Just the jacket. Julia looked at me, her face pale, lips trembling. She didn't have to speak. The truth was already sinking in. We were being hunted. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. The dark pressed in from every side. We turned back slowly, step by step, retreating from the empty jacket, retreating from the unspoken finality of Stan's disappearance. He was gone, taken. And now, we were alone, lost in the frozen wild. I could see Julia fighting panic, forcing each breath to steady, scanning the darkness for anything familiar, anything to hold onto. We have to move, she whispered hoarsely. We're exposed here. We retraced our steps toward higher ground, forcing our way through thigh-deep snowdrifts. The night had turned bitter, each gust of wind slicing through our layers and biting down into our bones. The trees loomed close, dark, silent sentinels. They pressed in on all sides, forming a wall of shadow that hid whatever was stalking us. Julia moved stiffly ahead, gripping her flashlight. Its narrow beam lit only a small circle of glittering snow, swallowed quickly by the darkness. I followed close behind, heart pounding, every sound, the creak of a branch, the crunch of distant snow sent jolts of fear through my chest. I kept glancing behind us, the blinking red light of my GoPro the only sign we were still tethered to reality. Its battery light flashed again, dangerously low. Then it happened. A violent crash erupted behind us, something charging through the brush, heavy, fast. Real. My heart surged into my throat. Run! Julia's voice cracked like lightning in the stillness. We bolted. Blindly. Adrenaline buried our exhaustion. Our legs pumped furiously through the snow. Julia stumbled, falling forward, sprawling into the powder. I skidded to a stop, reaching back to help her up, but I was too late. A blur burst from the trees, massive, fast beyond comprehension. It seized Julia by her backpack and yanked her violently into the darkness. She didn't even scream, just a single, sharp gasp, and then silence. She was gone. Panic hit me like a crashing wave, freezing my limbs. Breath caught painfully in my throat. I stared into the black void where Julia had vanished, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes had seen. Then reality slammed into me. I was alone, utterly exposed. I turned and ran, harder, faster than I ever thought possible. The cold tore through my lungs with every gasping breath. Tears streamed down my face, freezing in jagged trails across my cheeks. Up ahead, moonlight shimmered across fractured ice. A sprawling field of crevices stretched over the slope like gaping wounds in the glacier's skin. Desperation drove me into the maze. I slipped once, nearly falling, but caught myself just in time, teetering above a narrow crack barely wide enough to swallow a person. Without thinking, driven only by instinct, I forced myself down into the crevasse. The ice wall scraped at my sides as I wedged into a jagged niche. I pressed my back against the frigid wall, the cold biting mercilessly into my spine. Darkness enveloped me. I switched off my flashlight, leaving only the faint red glow of the GoPro's blinking light. Time slowed. Minutes dragged like hours. My body convulsed uncontrollably from the cold. Every breath sounded impossibly loud in the claustrophobic space. Then a sound above. Soft, deliberate snow shifted. Something large was moving. It crunched carefully overhead, slow, certain steps until the sound stopped directly above me. I held my breath. Through the narrow opening above, moonlight shimmered faintly until it vanished. A massive shadow blocked the light. Silent, still. My stomach twisted. Terror gripped me, coiled tight around my throat. Then two eyes blinked open. Pale, luminous, unnatural. They hovered impossibly high above, peering straight down into the crack and wavering. Intelligent, watching me. Waiting. My blood froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. The eyes stayed there for an eternity. Then, slowly, agonizingly, they vanished. The crunching steps retreated, faded, silence returned. But the fear didn't leave. I didn't move. Not for a long time. I stayed wedged in that icy tomb until the faintest glow of dawn spilled into the crevasse. Finally shaking, frozen eye began to climb. My fingers scraped against the jagged ice. Bleeding, numb, my joints screamed in protest. After hours of stillness, but I didn't stop. I pulled myself onto the surface. The sky above was pale, the forest silent, unmoved by my survival. Around me, the world was indifferent. With numb fingers and shattered breath, I was still alive, for now. I triggered the emergency beacon strapped to my pack, then collapsed into the snow. I had no strength left. Exhausted, half dead, I lay there, shaking violently from exposure and shock, waiting for help beneath the pale morning sky. Hours later, a search team found me. They said I was barely conscious, hypothermic, raving. My words were incoherent, my body stiff with cold. They airlifted me to Fairbanks Regional Hospital, somewhere between blackouts and blurred voices. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind looping through the horrors I couldn't forget. In the sterile quiet of a hospital room, I finally woke. There were sympathetic faces, careful, measured voices, gentle questions wrapped in clinical calm. The official explanations came quietly, spoken as if they were a comfort. Julia and Stan were gone, lost to the elements, presumed dead in an avalanche-prone region. No, I whispered, voice hoarse, barely audible through cracked lips. Something took them. The investigators nodded with professional sympathy, pitying, dismissive. I asked about the footage. They told me the GoPro had been recovered, but the files were corrupted, unreadable. Technical malfunction. They explained gently. It happens. I said nothing more. Days later, they discharged me. I left the hospital hollow-eyed, a shell of myself. No one met me. No one came to ask for more. Alone in my apartment, I wrapped myself in blankets and sat in the silence, the world outside continuing without me. The trauma echoed in every quiet moment. That night, I reached into my backpack with trembling hands. There, hidden in a side pouch, was the backup SD card. My breath caught. My pulse stuttered. I slid the card into my laptop. Footage flickered. Two life-blurry frames racing past. Trees, snow, the staggered rhythm of our snowshoe tracks. The faintest suggestion of movement in the trees. Then it froze. One frame, clear, unmistakable. A tall figure, human-shaped but undeniably wrong. Its limbs were too long, its proportions distorted, and from its shadowed face to faintly glowing eyes stared directly into the camera, luminous, fixed, and inhumanly high above the ground. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands trembled. My skin turned cold. The dread crashed over me again, nauseating, absolute. I knew what I had seen. It had followed us, stalked us, taken them. And now it was still out there. Waiting. Silent. Patient. In the vast, frozen wilderness of Denali, waiting for the next group to wander too close. Story. No two people around Rapid City like to talk about the Black Hills as if they're tame, tourist-friendly woods, just some place to hike and camp. But growing up hunting these mountains with Levi and Grandpa taught me otherwise. The hills are ancient, quiet, and unpredictable. They're dotted with granite cliffs and thick stands of ponderosa pines that make you feel like you've stepped back in time. Every local knows there are spots you just don't wander into after dark. Levi and I thought we knew these hills well, or at least, we thought we did. We had spent the early part of October planning our elk hunt. The rut was in full swing. The bulls were screaming across the ridges. It was tradition for Levi and me ever since Grandpa taught us how to hunt. After he passed, it became the best way we knew to remember him, to stay connected. We drove up from Rapid City late in the afternoon. The bed of my truck was loaded with gear to rifles, ammo, backpacks, tents, and sleeping bags. We stopped at a little reservation gas station outside Keystone. Levi and I were laughing, talking loudly about the trail we'd chosen. Inside, an old Lakota man named Raymond to Feathers overheard us and stepped closer. "You boys going hunting up Trail 73? His voice was low, cautious. "Yeah, that's the plan," Levi answered, handing the cashier a 20. Raymond shook his head slowly, eyes narrowing as if studying us, measuring what we could handle. "Wouldn't recommend it past sundown," he said quietly. "Locals call it Hollow Run. Animals won't go near it after dark. You shouldn't either." Levi glanced at me with a grin, shrugging off the warning with youthful confidence. "We'll keep an eye out." The old man's expression never changed, just steady caution. "It's not your eyes that'll save you." We laughed it off as we climbed back into the truck. Levi joked about it, but something stuck with me, nodding quietly at the edge of my thoughts. As we drove deeper into the hills, it was just past sunset by the time we parked at the trailhead. The mountains darkened quickly, casting long shadows through the pines. Levi carried the rifles while I shouldered our gear. Trail 73 snaked deeper into Norbrook Wildlife Preserve, climbing steadily higher into untouched terrain. We moved quickly, ignoring the fading daylight. Elk bugled nearby, close enough to feel the sound deep in our chests. Excitement overtook caution. We went further than planned, chasing the call until it abruptly faded, leaving us alone in the quickly darkening woods. "I think we missed it," Levi whispered, staring into the shadows. "We should set up camp." We cleared a small area, pitched the tent, and built a quick fire. By the time darkness swallowed the last traces of twilight, I noticed how unusually quiet everything had become. No crickets, no birds, nothing. It was as if someone had muffled the forest. The silence felt unnatural, oppressive. I settled into my sleeping bag, rifle propped against my pack within reach, listening to Levi's breathing deepen into sleep. Something about the stillness made me uneasy, like waiting for a sound you expect, but that never comes. Around midnight, I jerked awake, heart pounding. A heavy, unmistakable crash echoed through the trees, jarring me upright. Levi was already sitting up, eyes wide and searching the darkness. "What the hell was that?" he whispered harshly. I reached for my rifle. We listened, but nothing followed. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, no snapping branches, just a deafening absence of sound. It made my pulse quicken, a dread settling deep in my gut, heavier than fear. Another crash sounded closer this time, violently shaking branches somewhere off to our left. Still, no accompanying sounds. No footsteps, no animal breathing. Levi scrambled to the tent flap, shining his flashlight into the pitch-black woods. "Nothing, Cody. There's nothing there," he muttered, disbelief lacing his voice. He swung the beam around, the bright circle illuminating pine trunks, bushes, and empty darkness. But the silence felt alive, thick, suffocating. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, adrenaline hammering through my veins. Whatever had crashed through the woods seemed impossible, unnatural, something massive moving without a single audible step. My mind flashed to the old man's warning. My stomach twisted in regret. We sat awake the rest of the night, rifles clenched tight, eyes straining against shadows and silence. The invisible thing circled slowly, branches periodically shuddering, marking its unseen path. It never approached, never revealed itself clearly, but its presence felt as tangible as my pulse. By dawn, the woods slowly stirred to life again. Birds tentatively called from distant trees. Levi and I barely spoke, numb and exhausted, packing our gear quickly. As daylight returned, so did our confidence. Levi tried to rationalize what we'd experienced. "A mountain lion, maybe, or a startled bear," he said. But I couldn't shake the dread, the feeling we'd stumbled across something we weren't meant to understand. I glanced back down Trail 73 as we walked away. Sunlight streamed between trees, chasing away the shadows that had terrified us hours earlier. I hoped we'd seen the worst of it. We hadn't. Morning sunlight brought temporary relief, filtering gently through the high pines and casting golden patches across the forest floor. The light made the terror of the night before seem distant, almost unreal. Levi busied himself packing gear with forced calmness, but I caught him glancing back toward the silent trail more than once. Neither of us had slept, and exhaustion weighed heavily on our movements. "We should get out of here," Levi finally muttered, tightening the straps of his pack. "I've hunted here my whole life, Cody. Never experienced anything like that." I swallowed hard, nodding in reluctant agreement. Part of me wanted desperately to dismiss it as a trick of fatigue and nerves, but my gut twisted at the memory of the crushing silence and unseen impacts. Still, Something stubborn, a remnant of pride or maybe fear of admitting we were shaken, pushed back. "One more night," I said quietly, avoiding his eyes. "We're already here. Let's just move camp higher ground, maybe get away from whatever that was." Levi stared at me, uncertainty clear on his face, but eventually, he gave a short nod. "All right," he sighed, "but we keep the rifles loaded this time." By noon, we reached higher terrain and overlooked near a rocky outcropping that offered good visibility and felt less oppressive. Levi visibly relaxed as we set up the new camp, but unease still gnawed at my nerves. I kept scanning the surroundings, my eyes constantly darting from tree to shadow. I caught myself flinching at every rustle of leaves or the distant snap of a twig. Probably just animals, but still, the usual sounds of the woods, chirping birds, insects. Wind in the branches offered some comfort, at least for now. Late in the afternoon, Levi called out to me from just beyond a dense thicket. "Cody, come look at this." I pushed through the brush and found him standing over the remains of a bull elk. It was partially hidden beneath low shrubs, but what we could see was brutal. Fresh blood stained the dirt. The elk's ribs had been cracked open with raw force snapped apart. Not chewed, no neat bites, no evidence of a predator's feeding pattern. Just splintered bones, sharp and jagged like someone or something had torn it open with sheer strength. Levi crouched beside it, running his finger carefully along the broken rib cage. "What could do this?" he murmured. "No bite marks, no claws. Looks like something just broke it apart." I glanced around, heart pounding, eyes searching the ground. "No tracks either," I said. "Elk don't just explode open like this. Maybe it was dropped from above," Levi offered, though even he didn't sound convinced. He looked up toward the canopy, voice trailing off in disbelief. We quickly made our way back to camp, each of us deep in thought. Neither of us said much. The conversation felt strained, thin, like it might snap if we pushed too hard. As night fell again, the tension returned, heavier now, as if the darkness itself was watching us. It felt thick and oppressive, smothering the air. Levi built the fire up into a steady blaze. I sat nearby, back pressed against a tree, my rifle laid across my lap. "You think the old man was right?" Levi finally asked, his voice quiet, eyes fixed on the fire. "I don't know," I said, reluctant to admit what I felt deep in my gut. "But if anything comes near us tonight, we don't hesitate." The darkness returned with an eerie swiftness, bringing with it that same unnatural silence. The birds stopped calling, the insects went quiet, even the breeze had vanished. All that remained was the pop and crackle of burning firewood. Levi shifted beside me, his eyes wide and alert. He gripped his rifle tightly. "We need to stay awake," he whispered hoarsely. "We need to." He stopped mid-sentence, head tilting slightly toward the darkness beyond the firelight. Something shifted nearby. It was so faint I wasn't sure if I actually heard it, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. My pulse quickened. I strained to hear, but nothing followed. No footsteps, no breathing, no animalistic huff or growl. Just a deep, suffocating stillness. "I'll be right back," Levi muttered, voice tight and strained. "Just need a second." Before I could say anything, he stood and stepped out of the fire's glow, moving toward the edge of the camp. Then he disappeared into the brush. Seconds passed. Then minutes, long, drawn-out minutes where the only sound was the blood pounding. In my ears, each heartbeat felt louder than the last, each breath more difficult. "Levi," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. Levi'd no answer. Panic surged sharply in my chest as I stumbled forward toward the spot where Levi had vanished. My rifle shook in my grip, flashlight beams slicing through the trees in frantic sweeps. "Levi," I called out again, louder this time, voice cracking. Then I froze. Just 20 feet from the edge of camp, Levi's boots sat on the forest floor perfectly upright, side by side, as if he'd simply stepped out of them. No blood. No scuff marks. No signs of a struggle. The footprints leading away from camp stopped cold, not faded, stopped, as though my brother had been lifted straight out of the world. "Levi!" I screamed into the dark, my voice shredded by terror. I raised the rifle and fired a shot into the air. The sound split the stillness, thunderous and sharp. Its echo rang out briefly, then faded into nothing. Silence returned, heavier than before. No response. I backed away, stumbling to the fire and throwing more wood on it, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped everything. Flames roared to life, but they couldn't chase away the cold dread settling over me. The isolation was crushing. I could feel it pressing in on all sides. I climbed into a tree near the camp, forcing myself up to a sturdy branch with a clear view below. My legs trembled. My fingers clutched the rifle so tightly they ached all night. Something circled me. I never saw it, never heard it, only sensed it through the faintest shift of branches, or the sudden change in the air's pressure. It would stop occasionally, just beyond the firelight, and sit there, watching, breathing, existing. Its presence was heavy, suffocating, a shadow that didn't need light to exist. The hours dragged by in an endless nightmare. My body ached, my mind screamed, but I never moved. I couldn't, not without inviting it closer. Finally, dawn began to break, slowly bleeding into the sky with muted shades of gray and dull orange. The birds returned, cautiously resuming their morning calls. The breeze picked up slightly, rustling the trees. Nature pretended nothing had happened. I remained in the tree until full daylight. When I climbed down, my limbs were stiff and shaking, my entire body worn to the bone. I approached the boots again. They still sat there undisturbed, mocking me. Levi was gone, and something else, something unimaginable, was still out there, just beyond my reach, hiding within the trees, waiting. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at the boots. The forest had returned to normal. Leaves whispered gently in the breeze. The birds called lazily from above. Every part of me screamed to run, but I didn't. I kept waiting, half convinced Levi would suddenly stumble back through the trees, laughing off the sick joke, but he never did. Eventually, I reached for my radio and called out again and again, pleading, desperate. The only reply was static, harsh, empty, relentless static. My throat tightened. Panic crawled up through my chest like fire. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed Levi's boots, stuffed them into my pack with shaking hands, and ran. I followed Trail 73, the same one we'd used to get in. Branches tore at my arms and face, but I barely felt them. Pain had become background noise. My breath came in gasps. My legs burned with every step. Fear buzzed in my skull like electricity. Every shadow reached for me. Every shift of the trees made my heart skip. Time lost meaning. The forest blurred. The sun moved across the sky without my notice. I only knew I had to keep going. Eventually, exhaustion took hold. My frantic pace slowed to a stagger. My lungs burned. My legs buckled with each step. When the sun began to sink once more beneath the horizon, the terror returned, cold, suffocating, and all-consuming. The night was coming again, and thought of spending another night alone, especially with whatever had taken Levi, was unbearable. I stumbled forward, barely aware of direction or terrain. Instinct guided me now, nothing else. My legs moved, but my mind was unraveling. The shadows thickened around me. Silence crept back, and like a heavy curtain drawn tightly across the forest. I gripped the flashlight with both hands, its beam flickering wildly as I swept it side to side. Trees, more trees, endless trees. The sounds of the forest, the chirps, the rustles, the creaks no longer brought comfort. I didn't trust them. They weren't real. They mimicked familiarity, mimicked life, all to hide something monstrous. Then I heard it. Levi's voice, faint but clear, unmistakably his. Cody, he called. My chest tightened. I spun around, the rifle shaking in my grip, my heart hammering. Levi, I whispered, barely able to form the word. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, thin, brittle, nearly broken. Silence. Then again, further back along the trail I'd come from, his voice floated through the trees, softer this time, pleading, Cody, help. Levi, I shouted his name, my voice raw, echoing uselessly through the dark woods. I took a single, hesitant step backward, but something inside me screamed to stop. I froze. The sound was wrong. The voice, though it was Levi's, was hollow, empty. It lacked warmth, lacked life. It sounded like someone trying to be him, but failing. It was a flat mimicry, and it chilled me to the core. My stomach twisted with revulsion. My mind flashed back to the old man's warning. It's not your eyes that'll save you. Whatever was out there, it wasn't Levi. It had never been Levi. Suddenly, crashing sounds erupted from the forest around me. Branches shuddered violently, snapping and bowing from unseen impacts. Something was racing toward me within human speed, but still no footfalls, no growling, just motion, just force, relentless, impossible. I turned and ran, blind panic surging through every nerve. My boots slammed into the ground as I tore through the trail, branches whipping my face, ripping at my arms, shredding my sleeves. My rifle caught on a limb, yanking painfully against my shoulder strap, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Adrenaline flooded my body like fire in my veins, and then I broke free. Trail 73 ended, spitting me out onto the rough dirt of an old ranger. road. My eyes locked onto faint lights flickering far ahead, small, golden, and shaking. The ranger station. A jolt of desperate hope shot through me. I pushed harder, lungs screaming, feet pounding furiously. Whatever chased me was silent, but I could feel it. It was gaining. I didn't hear it, I felt it. In the pressure against my back, in the weight hanging in the air behind me. Real, tangible, dreadful. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, but the presence loomed so thick it nearly crushed me. Then, like a ghost emerging from a dream, the ranger station appeared, bathed in faint moonlight. Dark windows, silent walls. I reached the porch, nearly collapsing into the door. I rattled the handle. Locked. Double quotes. No, come on. A fresh wave of panic tore through me as I was still deep in the woods. A silent, invisible force crept closer. Brush snapped sharply at the edge of the forest behind me. Without thinking, I scrambled around the side of the station, grabbing wildly at the gutter pipes. My fingers scraped raw against the metal as I pulled myself upward, struggling for every inch, panic giving me strength I didn't know I had. I hauled myself onto the sloping roof, barely able to breathe. My chest heaved as I crawled toward the highest point, turning awkwardly, rifle shaking in my hands. I pointed it into the darkness, finger trembling on the trigger. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, but I knew it was out there. Something was watching me, waiting. I screamed into the night, shouted broken, senseless words, and fired wildly into the trees. Bullet after bullet disappeared into the woods until the rifle jammed, the bolt clogged with pine needles and dirt. I tried to fix it, but my hands wouldn't work. They shook violently, numb, bloodied, freezing, trapped, weaponless. I curled tightly against the shingles of the roof, eyes wide, my body stiff with terror. The darkness stared back at me, and dread swallowed me whole. Hours passed. Time dissolved into nothing, replaced by exhaustion and the endless pounding of my heart. And yet, I didn't move. Even when dawn arrived, gentle gray light painting the world below, I stayed where I was, frozen, still unable to trust the silence that had tricked me so many times before. Eventually, I heard it, soft at first. The sound of a truck, wheels crunching on gravel. A door slammed. Then dash voices. Someone was calling my name. I didn't respond, couldn't. I barely registered it. Then a face appeared below the roofline. Ranger Jenna Michaels. Her eyes widened in disbelief, horror, and concern. Cody, my God, what happened? I tried to speak, but no words came. My tongue felt thick, useless. Jenna coaxed me down gently, her voice calm and steady. Her hands were warm and firm as she helped me into her vehicle. She kept talking, trying to soothe me, but her words blurred together. Everything did. Sound, sight, time. They all smeared into one long stretch of numbness. Later, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, I finally spoke, fragmented, disoriented. Nurses and doctors hovered nearby, watching me carefully as I tried to explain. Levi's disappearance, the unnatural silence, the thing in the woods, the voice. That wasn't his. No one said much, just uneasy glances, whispered conversations behind closed doors. The search teams returned a few days later. They didn't find Levi, only his shredded gear, and something else, something that didn't belong. A strange bundle of fur, coarse, gray-black, found high in the trees. Too high for any known predator. The official explanation: animal predation. Hollow words, empty comfort, a tidy answer for those who needed one. But not for me. Weeks passed. The investigation was quietly closed. A few condolences, promises to stay in touch. None of it mattered. I left South Dakota shortly after, moved far away from those woods, from that trail, from the Black Hills that had swallowed my brother whole. But distance changed nothing. I still hear the silence, still feel the dread, still remember the hollow echo of Levi's stolen voice calling to me from the dark. And I know whatever took him is still out there. Waiting. Story. No 3. I'd been backpacking plenty of times before, enough to know the difference between real adventure and outright stupidity. But when Jake pulled out those faded old maps of the trails south of Klingman's Dome, I should have known. We were drifting into the latter category. He insisted it would be better this way. No tourists. No screaming kids at the summit. Just the 4 of us, deep in the untouched parts of the Smokies. Marcus loved the idea immediately. He always thrived off trouble, the kind of guy who smiled when things got risky. Aaron, our group's unofficial voice of reason, only gave a reluctant nod. Me, I didn't want to argue. I just went along with it. The plan seemed simple enough. We'd leave the popular lookout area and drop below the tree line into Gregory's Hollow. A shadowed valley tangled in dense rhododendron and ancient hemlocks. Jake had this confident swagger about him, acting like he knew exactly what he was doing, even though he'd only been here once, as a kid. "Come on, Sam," he said to me with a wide grin. "It'll be unforgettable." He was right, but for reasons we couldn't possibly imagine. We left the crowds and selfie sticks behind, and within an hour the trail narrowed, twisting sharply downward. Fog seeped between the trees, making the forest floor slick and uncertain. As the light dimmed and the canopy thickened, my anxiety started to sharpen. My uncle used to tell me stories about this part of the mountains, about things he called the old spirits, creatures that lived in the shadows, watching from behind the trees, waiting for someone foolish enough to stray off trail. Jake would have laughed if I mentioned it. Marcus would have mocked me endlessly, and Aaron would have brushed it off as old superstition. So I kept my mouth shut. By late afternoon, we reached a small clearing near a creek bed. Jake declared it the perfect place to camp. Aaron, quiet and efficient as always, began unpacking her gear. Marcus and Jake got the fire going, their laughter echoing through the hollow. I stayed near the edge of the clearing, glancing frequently over my shoulder into the deepening gloom of the woods. We ate dinner quickly, hung the bear bag high between two tall pines, then settled around the fire as darkness swallowed the valley. The light from the fire was comforting at first. The snapping logs drowned out the uneasy silence that pressed in from the surrounding woods. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a faint sound echoed through the trees, metal rattling against metal. Just once. Marcus frowned. "Chains out here." Jake shrugged. "Just branches, maybe old logging gear." "Sure," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked its usual cockiness. Then I noticed something odd. Our bear bag suspended high between two tall pines was swaying gently back and forth, like someone had nudged it. But there was no wind. Erin stepped away from the fire, holding her hand up to the air. She stood still for a few seconds, then returned, shaking her head. "No breeze," she whispered. Jake laughed, though it sounded forced. "Maybe ghosts," Marcus snorted. "Ghosts don't bother me. Crazy mountain drifters do." Erin shot him a sharp look. Not funny. But the humor had already drained from Jake's eyes. In its place was something quieter, something less certain. We fell silent, ears straining against the forest stillness. Then it came, a heavy snap of twigs, sharp and deliberate, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Not the light-footed rustle of a deer, not the scurry of a raccoon. Something heavier, something intentional. My pulse jumped. "Something's out there," I whispered. Jake lifted his flashlight, the beam slicing through the dark. He skinned the wood slowly, carefully. Then we all saw it, a pale flash, low to the ground, darted between the distant trunks. Jake swung the leg toward it, but the spot was already empty. "Probably a fox," he muttered. "Foxes aren't white," Marcus said, glancing at me. He tried to sound tough, but I could hear the edge in his voice now. Jake shrugged again, trying to seem unfazed. "Whatever it is, it's probably more scared of us." "Yeah, right," Marcus said with a hollow laugh. "Sure it is." I didn't say anything. I just stared into the woods behind Jake's shoulder, a creeping chill coiling in my gut. The thought gnawed at me. My uncle's stories, whispered around campfires when I was a kid. Tales of a pale, crawling thing, gaunt, silent, watching, and then standing. Once it had chosen you. Eventually, the others drifted off to their tents, their good nights subdued, but I lingered by the dying fire, the cold of the night seeping into my bones. Every tiny sound made my head snap up, every rustle of leaves, every faint snap of a twig. And then I heard it, unmistakably clear. It was a moonless night when I heard it, a slow dragging sound, something heavy sliding through the underbrush, like a limp body being pulled across dead leaves. I waited, frozen in place. My breath was shallow, my ears strained against the dark. Nothing moved. I scrambled into my tent, zipping it tightly shut. My heart pounded as I pulled the sleeping bag up to my chin, eyes wide in the blackness. Just before I closed my eyes, I heard Jake call from his tent. His voice was muffled, strained. "Hey Sam, if we get eaten tonight, tell my mom I went down brave." He let out a laugh, weak, brittle, and forced. I didn't answer. Sleep eventually came, but it was fitful and restless, and it didn't last long. Just before the pale dawn filtered through the trees, I woke sharply to the sound of a zipper, Marcus's tent. I heard him muttering something about needing to pee. As he stepped out into the dark, I stayed still, waiting for him to return. I waited. But he didn't come back. The first jolt of fear came when Erin shook my tent. Her voice was low, tight with worry. "Sam, Marcus isn't here." I sat up, groggy and disoriented. Dawn had barely touched the woods. A thick fog hung heavy between the trees, and the morning air clung cold and damp to my skin. Marcus was reckless. Sure, but he wasn't stupid enough to wander far alone. I crawled out of my tent, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Erin stood a few yards away, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes scanned the woods, narrowed and sharp. Jake was already pacing near Marcus's tent. His movements were quick, agitated. He probably just wandered off to mess with us. Jake snapped, mostly to himself, but his tone betrayed something else, something closer to panic. He took his boots and headlamp. Erin said quietly. We called Marcus's name over and over, our voices cracking from strain, but the hollow just swallowed our shouts, giving nothing back, only silence. For nearly an hour, we searched, pushing through thick brush, tripping over roots, calling until our throats felt raw. Then Jake stopped. He stood staring at the rough bark of an old hemlock tree. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. Guys, come here. My stomach twisted as Erin and I approached. There, stabbed into the tree, was Marcus's knife, his favorite one, the bright orange handle unmistakable. It was jammed at least 8 feet off the ground. Above it, smeared on the bark, was something dark. It was already drying. Blood. Jake went pale, his fists clenched at his sides as he tried and failed to look composed. Erin pulled out her emergency beacon, fingers trembling as she fumbled with the switch. After a few tense seconds, her face changed. She stared blankly at the screen. There's no signal, she whispered, not even static. The fog thickened around us like a living thing, turning the trees into indistinct, shifting shadows. My mind raced back to the night before, the pale shape darting between trunks, the dragging sound through the leaves, the swaying bear bag, the way Marcus never came back. I forced myself not to connect the dots, but deep down, I already had. We packed fast, each movement frantic and jerky, like time was closing in on us. Erin took the lead, her shoulders stiff. Jake followed close behind, silent and tense, his jaw locked and eyes constantly scanning the path ahead. I stayed near the rear, my gaze darting to the edges of the trail, half expecting to see something pale and silent slip between the trees. Then, Jake suddenly stopped, raising a hand sharply. We froze in place, our pulses racing. His voice came low, barely a whisper. Did you hear that? I strained to listen. Silence stretched long and tight. Then we heard it, that same sound from the night before, a slow, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled through dead leaves. It echoed faintly through the trees, each second colder than the last. Jake's eyes widened. Erin stepped backward instinctively, bumping into me. Then Jake swung his flashlight toward the fog. The beam cut through the mist and something moved. A shape emerged for just a moment. White skin stretched thin over protruding bones. It crouched impossibly low, almost crawling. Its face was twisted, misshapen. A wide mouth, a flat nose. Eyes buried deep in shadow. My heart stopped, and then, before we could fully process what we were seeing, the thing darted sideways, gone in an instant, vanishing into the trees with unnatural speed. What was that? Erin gasped, clutching my arm. I don't know, Jake replied, his voice shaking. A drifter maybe, someone crazy. No, I whispered, the dread rising in my throat. That's not a drifter. They looked at me, waiting for an explanation, but I couldn't give them one. I was too afraid. I thought of my uncle's stories, his warnings, whispered late at night. Things he said didn't die, because they never really lived. Instead of speaking, I just shook my head and silently begged them to keep moving. We didn't stop again until evening. We found a narrow ledge, rocky and overgrown, half sheltered by dense brush. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best we could do. No one spoke as we set up camp. Everything felt mechanical, automatic. The air was heavier now, colder. It pressed down like a weight we couldn't shake. Marcus's empty tent still haunted us, its door flapping slightly in the breeze. Every noise from the forest beyond made me flinch. Jake refused to sit. He paced the camp, his eyes locked on the dying light between the trees. Night fell fast, too fast, and with it came the silence, a tight, suffocating quiet that wrapped itself around us like a shroud. Erin sat close to the fire and tried to calm Jake with soft words. He waved her off. We just have to make it through tonight, he muttered to himself, again and again, like a mantra. Eventually, I crawled into my tent. Exhaustion pulled at me harder than fear, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of a branch, every shifting leaf made my pulse spike. Then I heard it, a single, deliberate crunch of leaves close. Right at the edge of camp. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't nervous. It moved slowly. Confidently. Double quotes Jake. I hissed through clenched teeth, barely daring to move. It's here. Silence. Then Aaron's voice, panicked and urgent. Oh my God, Sam, don't move. And then through the faint moonlight bleeding through my tent wall, I saw it. A shadow passed slowly across the fabric. It moved low, far too low, dragging itself, inch by inch, just outside. Its limbs were elongated, joints bent at angles that defied anything natural. I held my breath, my entire body locked in place. Then fingers, long and impossibly thin, pressed softly against the side of my tent. They traced slowly along the fabric. Curious. Almost playful. Then a scream shattered the stillness. Jake. His voice was ragged, terrified. I ripped open my tent flap and stumbled out into the night, my heart pounding against my ribs. Jake's tent was shredded. Nylon fluttered gently in the wind, torn and long, deliberate strips. Erin was kneeling nearby, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Jake lay inside the ruined tent, curled tightly into himself, trembling. Blood streaked his arms in thin crimson lines that touched me. He whispered hoarsely, his voice barely more than breath. His eyes were locked on something behind me. I spun around. There was only darkness, and something else, a broken deer antler, driven deep into the earth near the cold remains of our fire. Marcus's shirt was wrapped neatly round its base. Jake wouldn't speak again after that, not a word. He just sat there, curled and shaking, his wide eyes scanning the fog, watching, waiting. Erin wrapped his wounded arm in gauze. Her hands trembled the whole time. I stood beside them, staring at the shredded remains of Jake's tent. The cuts weren't random. They were clean, precise, as if whatever made them knew exactly what it was doing. Dawn came slowly and willingly. The thick fog refused to lift, keeping our little clearing wrapped in a sickly, pale twilight. No one said much. There were no words left. Only instinct remained. We moved in silence, driven by fear more than purpose. I walked like a machine, the pain from my blistered feet numbed by adrenaline and dread. Jake moved stiffly, flinching whenever a branch snapped behind us. He kept glancing back over his shoulder like he expected to see something right there. Just behind him, Erin tried her radio again and again, each time only static. The sound made her flinch now, like it was mocking us. The fog thickened. It felt alive, pressing in, smothering the trail, swallowing landmarks and turning familiar ground into something alien. Erin stayed focused, marking trees as we moved with fast, deep slashes of her knife. It was the only thing keeping us from falling apart. But as we climbed, the terrain grew harsher. Each slope drained more of our strength. Every root and rock scraped at our resolve. Then Jake stopped abruptly. He stared straight ahead, his face pale, his eyes fixed on a wide oak just ahead. Erin stopped beside him and slowly raised her flashlight. 3 deep slashes carved into the bark. Clean. Precise. My stomach turned. Recognition stabbed through me. We'd passed that exact tree before, not long ago. Erin had marked it herself. We're going in circles, Jake muttered. His voice was hollow. Cracked. Jake's single quotes S voice came thin, barely audible. He pressed his palms to his temples, shaking his head. We can't get out of here, he whispered. It won't let us leave. His words tightened something in my throat. We have to keep moving, Erin said softly, her voice brittle but controlled. She reached out, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. We're almost there. We have to be. I didn't believe her. None of us did. But we moved anyway, pushed forward by sheer desperation and the lingering echoes of something darker. My uncle's warnings rang louder with each dragging step. It walks like a man, Sam, but it is in single quotes D. It lures you off the trail and never lets go. By nightfall, we reached another clearing barely visible in the thick, endless fog. Jake refused to set up his tent. He just curled against Erin under a rocky outcropping, shivering. I sat apart from them, my back pressed against a fallen log, eyes scanning every shifting shadow that surrounded us. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the soft hum of dying wind and the occasional crack of a distant branch. Time stretched, marked only by the dim battery display on Erin's watch as it slowly ticked toward dead. My limbs felt like lead. Fear dulled my senses. I drifted in and out of a numb, half-sleep. Then I heard it. Close, subtle, a slow, deliberate movement through dry leaves. Crawling. Jake stirred suddenly, eyes snapping open in terror, his hand clamped tightly around Erin's arm. I froze, heartbeat thudding against my ribs. And then I saw it. A shadow moving just beyond the veil of fog, low to the ground. It crept silently, steadily, its outline blurry, its joints shifting at The wrong angles. Don't move, Erin breathed, her voice trembling. Please don't move. But Jake couldn't hold. No, get away from me, he screamed, bolting upright. He stumbled backward, eyes wild with panic, limbs flailing in the dark. Jake, stop, I yelled, lunging toward him. But he was already crashing blindly through the underbrush. Erin tore after him, shouting his name, and I followed close behind, breath ragged and legs burning. Jake suddenly stopped. He stood frozen rigid, staring into the darkness ahead. Erin caught up and grabbed his arm, flashlight trembling in her hand as she raised it. That's when we saw it. Just beyond the trees, something stood motionless. Tall, gaunt. Its skin was pale as bone, stretched thin over sharp ribs, translucent, sickly. Antlers jutted from its skull, twisted, uneven, splintered like rotted wood. It stared at us, head slightly tilted, expression blank, emotionless. Run, Jake whispered hoarsely. And we did. We bolted, crashing through low branches and tangled brush, tearing through the forest with blind instinct. Jake fell twice, but he scrambled back up each time, panic driving his limbs. Behind us, I could hear it, the sound of soft, impossibly fast footsteps, steady, effortless, closing the distance. My lungs burned, my vision blurred from tears and sweat. Then Erin cried out ahead. She stumbled, falling hard to the ground. I grabbed her, pulling her up with all the strength I had left. I glanced behind me. The thing was closing in, its pale skin glowing faintly against the dark. It was almost gliding, moving with a speed that didn't belong to anything living. We ran, and we didn't look back. Daylight finally broke through the trees. Sudden and blinding. It poured over a worn trail junction, real, solid, and blessedly familiar. A weathered wooden sign stood just ahead, the letters rough but clear. Klingman's Dome Summit Trail to 1.5 miles. Erin gasped, a sound caught between relief and desperation. She raised the radio again, hands trembling, and pressed the call button. Please, she said, voice shaking. If anyone hears this, help us. We need help. Now. A long pause, then static cracked, and finally a voice. We hear you. Stay put. Those words were like a lifeline thrown across a chasm. The weight felt endless. Each second stretched thin, a test of our sanity. Jake sat slumped on the ground, eyes glazed, staring blankly down the trail behind us. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at Erin. Every time she tried to reassure him, he just turned away. When the park rangers finally arrived, hurrying along the trail in full gear, I could barely stay on my feet. One of them slowed as he took in our appearance. Torn clothes, mud-caked boots, wild, sunken eyes. What happened out here? He asked gently, scanning our faces. Erin answered, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 of us didn't make it. She looked down, her face pale. Marcus, Sam, they're gone. The ranger's brow furrowed in confusion. He glanced at me. Double quotes Sam, he asked, voice cautious. Erin blinked. Realization flickered behind her hollow eyes. I meant Marcus. She corrected softly. Marcus didn't make it. He's gone. Something took him. The ranger exchanged a quick look with his partner. Was it a bear? He asked. A cougar? Maybe. No, Jake said suddenly. It was the first thing he'd spoken clearly since dawn. His voice was sharp. Certain, no animal did that. Erin shook her head slowly. Her eyes looked empty now. We just want to leave, she whispered. Please. The rangers guided us up the trail, moving quickly but cautiously. Every few minutes, they glanced over their shoulders back into the trees, as if expecting something to follow. I didn't look back. I couldn't. 3 months later, a local news station ran a story. It was buried near the bottom of the page, beneath weather reports and traffic delays. A drone had picked up strange footage during a routine trail inspection over Gregory's Hollow. The video was grainy but clear enough. Something pale and emaciated, limbs far too long, a shape that moved with unnatural grace. It walked upright, at first, then dropped fluidly onto all fours, and vanished beneath the dense canopy before the drone could track it further. The figure's head was crowned with splintered antlers. Park officials declined to comment. Equals story. Number 4. I've spent 8 seasons as a wildland firefighter. And in all that time, I've learned something important. Every stretch of wilderness holds secrets. Some are harmless, some are dangerous, and some are best left buried beneath layers of ash and memory. But the San Juan National Forest felt different. Right from the start, it was as if the land itself didn't want us there. We touched down deep in the Hermosa Creek wilderness on a crisp September morning. From the helicopter window, the aspens glowed like veins of gold, threading through the evergreen hillsides. It was breathtaking. Our mission was simple: Prepare the backcountry for a large-scale prescribed burn. 8 days of hard work clearing deadfall, building fire breaks, flagging safe zones. My crew was solid. Nico was young, easygoing, always joking, his chainsaw buzzing confidently through thick timber. Joe was quiet but sharp, meticulous when it came to marking GPS waypoints. Bryce, the rookie fresh out of Arizona, was eager, if a bit nervous. And then there was Red from the Navajo Nation. He was our quiet backbone. Red had seen things, understood things, he knew when to speak. And when silence was wiser, we set up camp near a narrow stream, tucked into a dense grove of lodgepole pine and golden aspen. That first day passed smoothly. The rhythm of axes and saws echoed through the valley as we cleared underbrush and hacked away dead limbs. By nightfall, we'd carved a clean fire line stretching several hundred yards. It was going according to plan. Routine. Predictable. Until the next morning. Joe and Nico had gone out ahead to flag an eastern perimeter. I was radioing in gear checks when Nico's voice crackled through the comms. Calder, he said, voice tight. There's something weird out here. Define weird, I replied, wiping sweat from my brow and adjusting my helmet. Just come and see. Curiosity and a flicker of irritation nudged me deeper into the trees. I found them standing near a clearing, both silent, their expressions grim. Before them was a perfect circle of scorched earth. The ground inside was blackened. The trees at its edges were stripped of bark and leaves charred, but strangely undamaged beyond the burn line, as if fire had erupted suddenly in a flawless ring, and then vanished. Lightning strike? I asked, kneeling to sift the brittle ash between my gloved fingers. Joe shook her head slowly. No signs of lightning. Nothing overhead burned either. It's too precise. That's not all, Nico added, stepping back. He pointed toward the center of the ring. Look closer. I moved cautiously inward, pushing aside a layer of gray ash with the toe of my boot beneath it. I uncovered the edge of a stone wall, old, crude, and unmistakably man-made. We cleared more debris, brushing away layers of blackened dirt and charcoal. Slowly, a circular structure emerged, partially sunken, ancient, and unsettling in its symmetry. Inside the ring were animal bones, ranged in a perfect spiral. Weathered antlers jutted upward like crude stakes. Charcoal symbols were smeared across the inner stones. Dark, abstract, an angry dot at the center set a flat slab of rock, scorched black. Hardened resin, or maybe sap, had dripped and fused across its surface like veins of pitch. Behind me, Red stepped forward. He hadn't said a word until now. We shouldn't be here, he murmured. His voice was low and careful. This isn't ours. What is this? Bryce whispered, wide-eyed. Red didn't answer. He just stepped back, distancing himself from the structure. I looked around. Nico was tense. Joe's jaw was tight. Even Bryce looked pale. But we had a job to do. I forced my unease down and straightened up. Mark it on GPS, I said, keeping my voice even. We'll report it to base and move on. Joe took the coordinates, fingers tapping nervously at her screen. We hiked back to camp as the sun dipped low behind the trees. The mood was different now. The tension clung to us thick and oily, like smoke. Dinner passed in awkward silence. Even Nico kept quiet. Later that night, after most of the crew had retreated to their tents, I stayed awake. I sat beside the cold remains of our dinner fire, slowly turning my radio handset over in my hands. Normally, the forest at night soothed me. Its stillness was calming. But tonight, something about it felt wrong. That's when I heard it, a faint, familiar popping sound, soft, sharp, rhythmic. Like pinnacones bursting open in heat. But we hadn't lit any fires. I stood slowly and swept my flashlight across the tree line. Just dense shadow. I exhaled, embarrassed at how quickly my nerves had gotten the better of me. Then movement behind me. I turned sharply. Joe stood at the edge of camp, motionless, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She stared toward the forest, eyes wide and unblinking. Joe, I called softly, walking to her side. You okay? She didn't look at me. Her voice was hushed. You saw it too. Saw what? She hesitated. Her voice dropped further. Firelight, flickering through the trees. I thought it was a flare-up. She shook her head slowly. But when I went closer, it vanished. I lifted my flashlight and aimed it deeper into the woods. Nothing. Just shadows, mist, and the soft rustle of leaves. Probably your eyes playing tricks, I offered. But even as I said it, the words felt empty. Joe nodded, but didn't seem convinced. She retreated quietly to her tent. I lingered at the edge of camp, staring into the darkness. Something felt wrong. Off balance. Like the forest had shifted ever so slightly into something unfamiliar. When I finally lay down, sleep didn't come. Instead, I listened. I listened for everything. The soft sounds of wildlife. The creaking of branches. The sighing wind through pine needles. Then dashed just before dawn something else. Far off, indistinct. A human sound, a scream muffled and thin, stretched unnaturally. It floated on the wind like something torn from far away. Yet it felt close, alarmingly close. I bolted upright, heart hammering in my chest. But just as suddenly as it had come, the sound vanished, swallowed by the stillness. I didn't lie back down. I just sat there, staring into the dark, listening to the silence, and wondering what we had uncovered, and what else might be waiting in those woods. The morning brought light, but no comfort. The sun filtered weakly through the trees, pale and cold. Our camp felt heavy, like something unseen had settled over it during the night. Everyone moved slowly. Conversations were brief. Even Nico's usual jokes fell flat, his laughter brittle and short-lived. I sat with a metal mug of lukewarm coffee in my hands, trying to ground myself in something familiar. Forests play tricks on tired minds. I knew that, but the unease wouldn't leave. Near the edge of camp, Red crouched silently, scanning the tree line. Eventually, he glanced at me. His eyes were troubled, dark, and unreadable. Then he spoke quietly, so no one else could hear. My grandfather told stories about places like that, he said, nodding toward the woods. He called them burn circles, places touched by things we're not supposed to disturb. I raised an eyebrow, trying to hide my skepticism. Folklore. He shook his head once. Warnings. I wanted to dismiss it, to call it superstition. But something made me hesitate. I'd spent years trusting my instincts to survive wildfires, rough terrain, and sudden weather shifts. And right now, every instinct screamed that we'd wandered into something wrong. Mid-morning brought more than dread. It brought evidence. Nico returned from checking the gear cache, visibly shaken. Calder. He said, "You need to see this." His hands trembled slightly. I followed him. Joe came, too. The tarp covering our packs and tools was intact. Everything was neatly stacked, undisturbed. Except Nico's backpack. It was scorched. The fabric along its edges was blackened with soot. The nylon crisp as if it had been held over an open flame. But nothing else had burned. The tarp above it, fine. The gear beside it, untouched. How the hell did this happen? Nico muttered, flipping the pack over in disbelief. I scanned the trees, the ground, the air. No scorch marks, no embers, nothing. There's no sign of fire. Joe's voice tightened. "We need to report this." "Report what?" I snapped, more sharply than I intended. "Random soot." Joe's face hardened. I softened my tone. "Look, we'll call it in when we get a chance. Right now, we need to finish our grid sweep. Let's make sure the structure's marked properly. I want clear GPS coordinates ready when the chopper comes back." Joe nodded slowly. "Bryce and I will flag the site again. Maybe we missed something yesterday." I agreed, reluctantly, and watched them disappear into the trees. The air felt colder as the day went on. Not just cool but unnatural. The kind of chill that seeped beneath your skin, no matter how tightly your jacket was zipped. I kept glancing over my shoulder. It felt like something was watching me. Hours later, Joe and Bryce returned. Bryce looked off. Pale. Drained. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. He dropped to the ground near the fire pit and sat motionless, staring into the cold ashes. His shoulders were hunched. He didn't blink. "What happened out there?" I asked Joe quietly, pulling her aside. She hesitated, glancing toward him. "I don't know," she said. He shut down. He won't talk." Red approached Bryce and knelt beside him. "You all right, man?" he asked gently. Bryce didn't respond. He just kept scratching at his forearms, slowly and methodically. His fingers left long red marks across his skin. "It's hot," he murmured, voice distant. "Why is it so hot?" Red looked back at me, concern etched across his face. It wasn't hot. If anything, the air had gotten colder since midday. Bryce looked feverish. Haunted. That night, none of us slept. The camp was wrapped in tension, tight, silent, expectant, as if something waited nearby. I drifted briefly into a restless sleep after midnight, and that's when I heard it. The rustling outside jolted me awake. Through the thin tent fabric, I saw its orange flickers dancing along the trees. I scrambled upright, pulse pounding in my ears, adrenaline cutting through the haze of sleep. This wasn't imagination. It wasn't some half-dreamed illusion. The light was real. It moved like firelight, but there was no heat. No sound, only shifting, silent flames casting eerie shadows against the tent walls. From somewhere nearby, Nico shouted, voice tense. A Calder. "Do you see that?" I burst from the tent, boots skidding on loose dirt. Nico and Red were already outside, their faces bathed in that ghostly glow. The forest around us pulsed with it flickering orange, drifting between the trees like breath. No crackling, no smoke, just that sickly, rhythmic light weaving through the woods like something alive. Behind us, Joe's voice cracked. "Where's Bryce?" We spun around. His tent flap hung open, fluttering gently in the breeze. Empty. Panic surged through me. "Spread out," I shouted. "Find him now." We scattered, flashlights cutting ragged beams through the underbrush. Bryce, no answer, only silence. Then Nico's voice rang through the trees. "Over here." We ran fast. He stood rigid, staring at the ground. Lying in the dirt was Bryce's boot, melted, twisted, the sole blackened and warped, as if it had stepped through fire. Next to it, footprints, half-burned tracks blistered into the soil. The trail stretched into the woods, glowing faintly. Each step looked deliberate, too perfect, too human. Joe stared down, her breath shallow. Those weren't here earlier," she whispered. "We walked this path today." Red stepped beside her, flashlight beam fixed on the scorched prints. His voice was barely audible. "This isn't right. We shouldn't follow. Like hell we shouldn't," I snapped. "Bryce is out there." Red turned toward me slowly. His expression was hollow, empty of hope. "Bryce isn't out there anymore." A cold silence dropped around us. From behind the trees, the strange orange glow returned, faint and pulsing. Shadows shifted just beyond reach. The light blinked in and out like slow breathing, then vanished again. I grabbed the satellite beacon with shaking hands and thumbed the activation switch. The screen flickered, then dimmed. I stared in disbelief as it faded to black. No signal, no transmission. The beacon was dead in my hands. I shook it violently. Nothing. We stood frozen, caught between creeping shadows and a fire that didn't burn. Something ancient had awakened, something angry. And now, one of us was already gone. Dawn came slowly. Gray light filtered weakly through thinning leaves overhead. No color. No warmth. Just a pale wash of day. None of us spoke. Bryce's disappearance had drained what little morale we had left. Each of us sat alone, locked in our own spiraling dread, struggling to rationalize the impossible. I'd seen fires devour entire forests. I'd faced blazes that moved with the hunger of a living thing. But this was different. This was watching us. I'd seen hillsides swallowed in second storms of flame, leaping from tree to tree like living things. But never had I seen fire move without heat, without sound, without reason. It had taken Bryce, left behind only the warped imprint of his boot and silence. That last image of him haunted me. He'd looked feverish, lost, like something had hollowed him out from the inside. "We need to get out of here," Joe said finally, her voice dry and hollow. Red sat near the dead fire pit, unmoving, eyes fixed on nothing. Nico paced behind her, his face pale, his glances toward me becoming more frequent, expectant, desperate for answers I didn't have. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. "Agreed," I said quietly. "Grab essentials only. We'll head south toward the old trailhead." I tapped the side of the useless satellite beacon. "If the radio won't reach, maybe we'll catch a cell signal higher up." The others nodded, their movements stiff and robotic as they shoved gear into packs. As I turned toward my tent, Red stepped close. His voice was low, barely a whisper. "That place we found, it wasn't abandoned." I stared at him. "Something still uses it," he said. "What's something?" I asked, harsher than I meant to. "What's doing this?" Red shook his head slowly. "Not people," he said. "Not anymore. We moved out, single file, cautiously, along a narrow, overgrown path. The forest loomed around us, darker than it should have been. The sun, though risen, felt blocked as if something filtered it out. Each step echoed too loud. Every breath tasted wrong. The air was brittle, like it could shatter if we moved too fast. Nearly an hour passed before we emerged through a thick wall of brush and vines. Nico froze. "Stop," he whispered. I stepped beside him and felt my stomach turn. Another clearing. Another circle, smaller than the first, but identical. A ring of dark stones, still smoking. Ashes and embers glowed faintly, soft, orange-red, as if a fire had just gone out. Nico knelt beside it, reaching toward the stones. He pulled his hand back sharply. "It's hot," he whispered. "Still warm." We'd moved miles from camp, but it had been here recently. Maybe minutes ago. Then snap. A sharp crack of breaking twigs. All of us turned. Joe's voice was quick and desperate. "Bryce?" she called, her flashlight swinging into the trees. Bryce. Only silence answered. Red breathed faster, eyes darting. "We shouldn't be here," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Another sound closer, a rustle, followed by something deliberate, heavy. Joe's flashlight jerked through the shadows, wild and unsure. I saw something move, she whispered. They're behind the tree line. Her voice trembled. Red stepped forward, shielding her, his tone urgent. Stay close. He skinned the darkness ahead, shoulders tensed. Then he gasped, a raw, sharp sound. He stumbled backward, falling to one knee. Red, I shouted, rushing forward. He clutched his arms, gasping, shaking long. Dark burns traced up both forearms, angry. Red lines, blistering fast, etched deep into the skin. It looked like something searing had grazed him. But there was nothing. No flame. No figure. It moved through me, he whispered, eyes wide with horror. It moved through me, he choked, eyes wild with disbelief. It burned through me. I lunged forward just in time to catch him as his knees buckled. Red trembled violently in my arms, his breath shallow, ragged. Joe crouched beside us, face pale and horrified. Then without warning the forest erupted in pulses of flame, orange. Fire exploded silently through the trees. No crackling. No smoke. No heat. Just cold bursts of fiery light, flickering between trunks, casting monstrous shadows. In those bursts, figures appeared, ash-covered silhouettes, human shapes, motionless. Watching. They vanished each time I blinked. Nico stumbled backward, eyes wide, hand trembling as he pointed. There, surrounding us, he whispered. It's trapping us. Suddenly, a flame ignited along Nico's sleeve. He screamed a raw, tearing scream that broke the silence and echoed through the trees. I dove toward him, beating desperately at the fire, but it didn't go out. It spread, faster than I could stop. The flames devoured his jacket, blistering skin bubbled beneath blackened cloth. His screams turned into agonized shrieks. Then he collapsed. Joe grabbed my arm, yanking me backward, her voice frantic and breaking. We have to run. We fled. My legs barely worked, numb with fear and exhaustion. Behind us, Red lay still. Nico was gone. The woods spun around me, chaos and fire bleeding through every shadow. Branches clawed at our faces. My breath came in panicked gasps. Then Joe disappeared, her grip ripped from my sleeve as something yanked her away with inhuman force. Her scream short, sharp, then silence. Joe! I stumbled forward, blinded by tears, shouting her name into a forest that wouldn't answer. Suddenly, I broke through a thicket and stumbled into a clearing. Orange light washed across it, cold and still. Another circle of stone, a third fully intact. At its center, Joe knelt. Her body was still, her eyes wide, staring at nothing. Joe, I cried, rushing toward her, my voice ragged. Joe. But she didn't move. As I reached her, a ring of flame surged upward around the stones, brilliant, blinding and ice cold. I dropped to my knees beside her. Joe, I begged, shaking her shoulders. Please say something. Her lips moved, just barely, silent words. Her eyes didn't see me. They looked past me, empty. Then dash blackness. A wave of cold hit me like a collapsing wall. I woke slowly, fluorescent lights above me, sterile white walls, a hospital bed. Every inch of my body ached. Bandages covered my arms and face. My skin felt raw, like it had been peeled away and barely grown back. Doctors spoke in hushed tones at my bedside. The sheriff came. He asked what happened. I had no answers, only fragments, flashes of impossible fire. Screams. Figures in the dark. Later, they told me something strange. Satellite images had captured sudden heat signatures all around our location, bursts of temperature, spikes, circles of flame, appearing, disappearing. But no fire crews found anything. No embers. No scorch paths. Nothing natural to explain it. Weeks passed. Search teams went in. They found our camp just as we left it. But the stone circle, it had changed. New bones now littered the ground. Antlers. Fresh scorch marks. Footprints. Our boot prints, still burned into the earth. When they asked for an explanation, I had none. Just a single, unshakable truth. We disturbed something that should have been left buried. And whatever still burns out there in those woods, it's waiting, watching for the next crew to wander too close.